Hey, ladies, welcome back to Women's Bible Study for the school year 23-24. I'm leading you off with Joshua, prophet of conquest. So I hope you're excited to be back in Bible study with your friends. A little bit difficult topic for this pastor, a little out of my wheelhouse to be doing Old Testament stuff and to be doing not topics or doctrine, but people. So I skimmed through your workbook a little bit in some of the areas, and because we are covering people in the Bible, your workbooks do a pretty good job of covering those major events. Now, Joshua has a whole book of material to cover, but some of these folks are a little obscure. So we'll do our best to add or supplement to what you've already seen in the book. But I have a feeling this year, a lot of the things we might say in this video are a bit, well, you've probably already encountered them as you went through the study yourself and the reading. But sometimes hearing something again from a different person will spark a new thought or idea. Sometimes the angle is just a little different. And so I'll try not to belabor this lesson, anticipating that a lot of it you're going to have already encountered. But I know sometimes the week is long or gets away from you, and maybe you show up because you like the time with the ladies and the learning, but you didn't quite get to your workbook. In that case, you may be getting someone for the first time, so I don't want to be too skimpy with what I talk about. All right, that's enough intro. Let's get going. Anyway, welcome back. I'm glad to kick the year off with you, although, as you know, feeling a little trepidation about whether I'm going to do a good job of that for an opening lesson here. So I have on your screen a title for Joshua's lesson, Prophet of Conquest. It's possible you didn't think of Joshua as a prophet. Moses is a prophet. Elijah and Elisha are prophets, or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or Isaiah, but Joshua is sometimes seen as more of a historical figure. So why am I calling him a prophet? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the conquest is kind of what Joshua is associated with. His main role in scripture is bringing God's people into the promised land after the wilderness wanderings. So that in a nutshell is the function he serves God, appoints him and raises him up for that specific purpose. All right, let me advance the slide here. Just to show you how Joshua is categorized differently by the Jews in the Hebrew scriptures than we sort of pigeonhole him in the Bible into a historical book. Of course, you have the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, written by Moses. That gets us to the precipice of the promised land. And then the historical books kick off that take us through the rest of the history of Israel. And then, of course, the prophets, major and minor prophets, depending on how much they wrote, they just speak at different times during this history. And then you have poetic books, books of wisdom that are written by some of the personas in that history. So those are kind of the major genres. And you see Joshua there, a little red box around at the top left. He's the first of the historical books in our Bible. But if you look down at the Hebrew scriptures, he's actually the first of the prophets. So you have the Torah, the law. Then you have the prophets, former prophets and latter prophets. And then you have what they call the writings. So they organize their Bible bookcase, if you will, a little differently. They called their Hebrew scriptures the Tanakh. And you see that there, T-A-N-A-K. The vowels don't actually get written in Hebrew. So T-N-K, the Torah. The N is Navi'im. That's the prophets. And the Katavim, that's the writings. You see Joshua here is seen more in the prophetic tradition, like we would characterize more of the latter prophets. So something to keep in mind as we proceed here. This map here is Joshua's handiwork. As they cross the Jordan River into the promised land, they conquer the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and all these other folks who are living in this land of milk and honey that God has appointed for Israel. They're going to take it over slowly, so it doesn't, become overgrown and be too difficult to handle. So But when they do take over an area, they're supposed to destroy those people completely. The reason for that is if you leave them around, it's likely they will influence you and you will adopt their pagan ways. So that's a difficulty some people have with the book of Joshua, is this command to utter destruction. Don't leave any man, woman, or child, right? Just annihilate them all, and then start fresh in that land. And when they don't do that, later on in scripture, it comes back to bite them. The pagan gods come roaring back into their midst. So there was a reason God gave the command, as difficult as it might sound in our ears. But you see the tribal allotments of Israel as they stand. Eventually, of course, this kingdom splits between Israel in the north and Judah in the south, even though the tribe of Simeon is kind of enveloped there with Judah. And the Benjamin is right on that border of Jerusalem. Benjamin and Judah kind of become Judah, from where we get the name Jews. The northern kingdom, after the split, eventually is all the other tribes, basically, who come to be known as the Canaanites. Well, the Canaanites lived there. When the Canaanites and the Israelites intermarry, they become Samaritans, and they were a hated race, which is why Jesus healing the Samaritan is such a big deal. Okay, well, enough of that. A great portion, I'd say a third or more of the book of Joshua, is just the account of settling these tribes in these specific lands. Okay, so that's functionally what's happening in the life of Israel during this book. But the man for the job is Joshua. By the way, Joshua's name means salvation. Yeshua, that's the name Jesus, right? It gets transliterated into Greek as Jesus, English as Jesus, but Joshua and Jesus have the same Hebrew name. It means salvation. So coming into the promised land was the Israelites' salvation, and Joshua is named so for his role in bringing them into the promised land. So again, biblical tradition associates the figure of Joshua with the conquest of the land of promise. In the wilderness period prior to that, Joshua serves as Moses' right-hand man, his assistant. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of charts. After Moses dies, remember, Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. I'll go over that little episode in a moment. Joshua leads a successful conquest into Canaan and then divides the land. Even though Joshua remains an obscure historical figure, I mean, he's not that obscure, but he's certainly no Moses or Isaiah or Elijah or Elisha, even though he does get a book named after him. The historical books emphasize his theological and national importance. They present him in a variety of roles. The book does, and then later on, as they reflect, they present him in a variety of roles. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on today, is the roles to which he was appointed to and how he fulfilled them. But first, as a successor to Moses, there's Moses laying his hands on Joshua. You take these people to the promised land. I am about to die. Remember, Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. All that hard work, bringing them out of Egypt, leading them in the wilderness wanderings, and Moses doesn't get to go. You might remember why. At the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses writes, I pleaded with the Lord, saying, O Lord, you have only begun to show your servant greatness in your mighty hand. For what God is there in heaven or earth who can do mighty works such as yours? Please let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country in Lebanon. But he writes, the Lord was angry with me because of you and would not listen to me. He's talking to the Israelites here. And the Lord said to me, enough from you. Do not speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the top of Pisgah, lift your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and look at it with your eyes, for you shall not go over to the Jordan. But whatever Moses did disqualifies him from going into the promised land. And then at the end of the book, we get the account of what God allowed him to do. It says he goes up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, Naphtali, Ephraim, Manasseh, etc. That map I just showed you, basically. Now, there's no way Moses could have seen all this land from the top of Pisgah, but we're assuming God sort of gives him spiritual eyes to see, or metaphorically, he's looking out on all this land. He says, this is the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not go over there. Moses doesn't get to cross the Jordan. He dies before. And it's because of one mistake he makes. Now, the punishment seems great, but I think this episode is a reminder that sin is serious in God's eyes and it does have consequences. And in this case, it cost Moses something he would have liked to see very dearly. We're given the reason in Deuteronomy 32. It says, that very day the Lord spoke to Moses, go up to this mountain of Abiram, Mount Nebo, which is the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, and view the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel as a possession, and die on that mountain which you go up, and be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron died on Mount Horeb was gathered to his people. Here it is, because you broke faith with me in the midst of the people of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, and because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the people Israel. For you shall see the land before you, but you shall not go there into the wilderness I am giving. So, okay, the incident occurs in the wilderness of Zin at the waters. You back up to Numbers 20, and here's what the big deal was. Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. Remember, they'd already struck the rock once, not on their way to Mount Sinai, and it brought forth water. Later on in the New Testament, we read that rock was Christ. Somehow Christ was present, miraculously providing water from that rock. But look at Moses and Aaron gathered before the rock, and they say, "Hear now, you rebels," because the people are rising up again. They're getting antsy. "Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And that one word, "we," is what gets Moses in hot water. Right? There wasn't no "we" to it. Moses and Aaron weren't a part of it. Moses struck the rock. God brings the water out of the rock. And so they get a little arrogant, a little loose with their tongue. They bring glory to themselves and not Yahweh. And for that, God says, no promised land for you. I'm sure there's more we could say about that, but I don't want to belabor the point, just to point out that it happened. And that's why Moses doesn't get to go, but it clears the way for Joshua's leadership. So it's kind of like, Drew Bledsoe goes down with a severe injury that almost kills him, but in hindsight, now we know about Tom Brady, right? The greatest quarterback to ever live, the GOAT. All right, maybe that's a bad analogy, but I just thought of it. Sorry. Okay, here is an outline. Well, two outlines, actually. There's an outline on the top. Who's this from? Chuck Swindoll, I think, did that. I like these outlines by Chuck. Charles Swindoll. These are good. You can Google them. If you Google like Genesis outline or Deuteronomy outline, almost every book, you go to the image search, these will come up. They're really nice for helping you see the structure of a book. This bottom one, I don't really know where I got it, somewhere on the internet, but I just wanted to show you the similarity. So if you look at the top, they divide it basically into 5 sections of Joshua. Chapters 1 through 5 are the commissioning of Joshua and preparing the people. They spy out the land, build some memorials for the people to remember, etc. And then chapters 6 through 9 and 10 through 12, battle, basically, conquering the enemy, taking over the land. There's the central campaign, Jericho, the defeat of Ai, and the Gibeonites. Those get kind of larger treatment. And then there's the southern campaign and the northern campaign and a summary. And you see in 10 through 12, all those battles are covered. So those are a little shorter accounts. But the big thing in 6 through 12 is taking the land. Then, as I told you, almost half the book, I guess, 13 through 22, is dividing the spoil or distributing the land and who gets what. And basically, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can basically look at the map of the 12 tribes of Israel and will tell you what these chapters tell you. Now, every once in a while, they're interspersed with a little bit of detail about what went on or some historical facts that you don't want to miss, of course. But again, you look at the map, you got this part of the book. And then kind of the good part, the one that people always remember and hang on to, is the conclusion. Let me just, I can't actually move this box, can I? Warning the victors, okay? And the words there, if you can't read them in case they're faithful prophet and leader, I'll get to that in a minute, those words in green. Warning the victor. So here you are in the promised land. You're sitting there fat, dumb, and happy with your new land, and you conquered. Now what? Be faithful, Joshua said. And this is where Joshua really shows his real leadership. You see the themes there of chapter 23 are separate yourselves from these nations around you. and serve the Lord. So then look at the outline on the bottom, very, very similar. It doesn't quite exactly line up with the one on the top because they're chunked up different. But again, spies enter Jericho 1-5, battles 2 and 3. There's this great account of the sun standing still during one of their battles. And that's kind of a famous part of Joshua that occurs in 10-12. Again, 13-21, distribution of the land. 22-24, Joshua's final orders, and then like his predecessor Moses, he died. His job having now been complete. All right, so with the remaining time, which hopefully won't take it too long, I just want to point out Joshua's main roles. This was, I think, talked about in your book. Start on the left. He's an associate of Moses, okay? What are some things he did for Moses? Well, after the Exodus, within 2 months, Moses recognized Joshua's talent and appointed him as a commander of his army, okay? And Moses successfully repulses an attack from the Amalekites already in Exodus 17 before they get to Sinai. So Joshua proves himself early on, very early on. He's recognized by Moses. Moses, in fact, changes his name to Joshua. That's not his original name. This happens in Numbers 13 and 1 Chronicles 7, if you want to look that up. He is one of the few that get to go with Moses up Mount Sinai. Now, only Moses gets to go to the tippy top and get the 10 Commandments, but he is one of the others, the elders, who get to go halfway up the mountain. And he's also guards Moses's tent and position. So he's the one that stands behind the tent and does all this. He's described as a minister of Moses, a servant of Moses, if you will. That's his job. He's his right-hand man. So it's no doubt, no surprise then that he will become Moses' successor, right? For following God wholeheartedly, he will escape destruction once in Numbers, we see. He, along with Caleb, receives assurance of entering the promised land, unlike Moses, who will not get to. Joshua and Caleb are told they will get to. They're the only ones of their generation who will. Moses designates him as a successor, also gives him some instruction, mentors him, charges him to be faithful, which he proves faithful. Commits a song of admonition and other writings to Joshua. He counsels him on different procedures. He encourages him as a leader. He warns that the people of Israel, who would know better than Moses, by the way, will become apostate. Some of them won't be faithful. But he promises also that the conquest would be successful. And so you get the feeling that Joshua relies incredible amount on Moses' influence and counsel. Once Moses is gone, Moses' voice is echoing in Joshua's ears throughout the rest of his life as he does the task to which he's been called. God had promised in Scripture that he would one day raise up a prophet like Moses. That prophet is ultimately Jesus, but there are many echoes of that fulfillment. For instance, young David is a shepherd taken from the flock, just like Moses was. He's a type of Moses. But Joshua's the first one. He doesn't get the street cred overall that Moses gets, but he fulfills a very important role. He gets to finish what Moses couldn't finish because of Moses' transgression. All right, he's a spy. He's part of the spying out of the promised land. He's a faithful spy. Now, this is not the spying of this time. He sends out the spies this time. But in Numbers 13 and 14, when they go to check out the promised land, you remember some of the people come back and say, oh, the people are too great. We can never take it. Joshua and Caleb are ones that say, now, wait a minute. We think we can do this. So they have a dissenting opinion. They're not afraid. They show courage. They don't exaggerate. And for that, they're rewarded later on, of course, with getting to enter the promised land. So Joshua gets a reputation as a man of his word. You can trust what he says. That's going to serve him well. He was of the tribe of Ephraim. That's whose tribe he represented when spying out the promised land. And he opposed the majority report, if you will. Almost suffer stoning for it, by the way, because remember, the people don't want to go in. They're afraid. So Joshua's saying, I think we can make it. It's not a good thing. So He's got the backbone to stand against the crowd, and that's going to ultimately serve him well at the end of the book. Then, of course, he's a warrior. He's a warrior. So you can almost see the roles of Joshua almost line up with some of the parts of the book. That's his main job, is directing the battle of the Promised Land. So he leads Israel to enemies, to victory in Exodus 17, and he keeps doing that then later on when they go into the Promised Land. He makes preparations. He sends his own spies out to gather intelligence. He leads the crossing of the Jordan River, and slowly he gains esteem like Moses. Sometimes they say following, a great pastor, the next guy gets crucified, and then he kind of takes one for the team, and then it's the next guy that comes in that the people will finally accept. It's really hard to succeed someone who's been so endearing, to the people. Well, Joshua does that. He's one of those rare people in history that can take up the mantle after a very successful leader and not miss a beat. Okay, he gains there, and he at one time says that he leaves nothing undone that God had asked him. So sometimes when some of these cities don't get fully conquered, it's not because Joshua didn't order them to be. He shows some mistakes. He's human. He shows a little bit of rashness against the Gibeonites. All right, moves too fast. So he's not pictured as a perfect person by any means, but he does the job fairly well. Fairly well. Okay, it'd be hard to bring too much against him in his role as a warrior. After all, they do take the Promised Land. If anything, it's the people under his command who end up being unfaithful and, spare some of the towns, etc. But what I really want to call your attention to as we finish up here, and I think that often gets overlooked. Well, it doesn't get overlooked because everybody makes a big deal about the end of the book. But remember, patriarch of a prophet of conquest, Joshua is seen as very much a final patriarch. Okay, he's right up there with Jacob and Abraham and Isaac and Moses. After this, there's kings, there's leaders, there's judges, but he's the last big name father, if you will. And sometimes, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, they get all the rap, but Joshua is very much seen that way by the rest of the Old Testament and by the Jewish people. All right, he's one of the patriarchs. He's one of the fathers in the faith. He is pictured as one who obeys and teaches the law. He's not just a good leader or military leader. He's a good faith leader. And that comes out, of course, at the end. He gives the book of the law to people early on in Joshua. He sets up, he manages their festivals. He gives them oversees their rituals. So he leads them not only in the ways of the world, but he leads them spiritually as a father in the faith. And that's probably his important legacy. Now, if you read the book of Judges, the people don't, it doesn't take for very long, if you will, I guess is what I'm saying, that the people quickly fall away, just as Moses said they would, but it's no fault of Joshua's. In fact, he shows his true colors, at the end, when he leads the people. And there's this famous quote: "If serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods and your ancestors you served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." And so in his last act, he sort of points the people towards faithfulness. He knows that living among these people in this new land is a test for the people, that there's going to be temptations heretofore unknown, and it's going to be a challenge for them to stay faithful. And so he sets the first examples. Basically, you can make whatever choice you want, but I'm encouraging you to choose the Lord, the one who's brought you here, the one who made good on his promise to bring you into the Promised Land. And so that's probably his most lasting legacy among the people, is the job he does as a servant, not of just Moses. By the end of Joshua, he's given a great title, Joshua 24:29. He's called a servant of Yahweh. So he goes from being a minister of Moses to being recognized as a servant of Yahweh. And that's probably no higher title or better title could have been granted to Joshua, I guess, other than sharing the name of our Lord, than to be called a servant of Yahweh. And he encourages the people to faithfulness. He dies at 110 years old at the end of the book. He has renewed the covenant of the Lord. He has pointed people towards God's law. He's brought them into the promised land. His work is done. And the rest, as we say, is history, biblical history. And it doesn't go so well. But we should look back on Joshua as a very faithful figure, someone who played an important role in the history of God's people, one of many who play an important role. And you're going to see more of those in the days and weeks to come. So, hey, hopefully that was an okay first lesson. I'm not an expert in Joshua by any means, but maybe you heard something new, or at least something reinforced about what you've already learned about him. And I'll see you sometime later with another historical figure, and we'll see if I can't do a better job. Good to be back with you, ladies. Have a great day.